Tamarind and do not disturb.
I think I'm the one with too much energy right now.
Do you though? Hello, welcome back to the BFF podcast, the Best Before podcast. My name is Ann Duskus of Studio Duskus, and here with me is my co-host.
It's me, Vic from Cestlavic. Welcome, beautiful people.
Yes! Vicky,
And
what are we going to talk about today?
so I think we should talk about the topic of privilege. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, let's do that. So right off the bat, I'm just going to ask you, what does that mean to you? I mean, we can go all over the place with this, but
Yeah.
let's talk about that in context of how we got to where we are today.
I think that when I reflect on the past couple of years and like how we're able to do what we do right now, it's because we are quite privileged in a way. And I mean that in a sense that at this point in my life, I have the privilege to be able to take on this journey and be a creative without having to worry about the roof above my head or a lot of things in life that, you know, don't need my immediate financial support or attention. And I think that that has really helped me grow, but that's not something that necessarily a lot of people have. So I do feel like very blessed right now and, you know, very thankful that the people that I have around me have helped me be able to achieve my dreams in that way.
So what I'm hearing is basically being able to pursue what you love to do at this moment in time without the worries of just financial worries, basically.
Yeah, without having
Yeah,
to
that's a
necessarily, because right now in my business, I'm not, I'm still building it up. So I'm not in a place where every single month I'm having very like steady income, right? Some months are worse than others.
Yeah.
And because my partner is able to like help me out, with a lot of things. And sometimes it's like, yeah, you can make money, but then it goes directly back into your business, reinvesting in like equipment or space or rent and things like that. So while I'm like hardcore pursuing this aspect of my life, the other parts of my life are kind of being well supported, I would say.
Yeah, privilege, I've been thinking about, so again, you know, to our new listeners here, we typically will kind of brainstorm on a topic the day before we're recording our episodes, just so we can kind of not that we can premeditate, you know, what we want to talk about, because we don't really talk about, you know, like in fine details, like very structured, this is what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
So it's really like, okay, let's just kind of both, you know, go away, sleep on it, and think about this topic and share what we have to say based on our experience in the past.
Yeah, because we didn't want this podcast to be scripted or anything. So it was more like let your subconscious digest and marinate, and then, you know, we kind of chop it up together.
Yeah. And so like privilege means so many things to me, you know, at the basic level right now, you know, it's exactly like what you said, you know, to be in a position where I can pursue what's fun for me. You know, I can't even say, if I'm being honest with myself, you know, am I really passionate about what I'm doing right now? Maybe no, right?
Okay.
Yeah, Vicky's like, well, that's new to me.
Yeah.
You know, because like, what does that even mean? Like, what are you really passionate about? You know, because I feel like that's, I've always felt that passion to be something that's like such an extreme thing. You know, because I feel like people view passion, the word, as in like, oh, you have so much conviction about this,
Right.
you know, you're all about it. And not that I'm not, but I can't say with like 100% conviction, I'm so passionate about shoemaking.
Yeah.
You know, because I don't think I am. You know, I think I really enjoy it, you know, and I think it makes sense for my business right now in terms of, you know, people being interested in my work enough to want to, buy the service from me, but I wouldn't say like I'm so passionate about shoemaking.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think, but again, it's a privilege to be in this position to be able to do something I enjoy doing.
Yeah.
That happens to be shoemaking. And so privilege is a very interesting word to me because I always try to think back on like, what did privilege mean to me growing up? As a child, as a teenager, as somebody in my 20s, as somebody in my 30s, because I feel like they all mean a little different.
Yes.
And so if I, not a lot of people know this about me or what we're about to talk about now. Like if we're going back in time and talking
Let's
about
dial it back, yeah.
right, like our upbringing, because it's, we never really have an opportunity to talk about these things. So this is like the perfect opportunity.
Yeah.
And so I think, as a child and even, in my teens and my early 20s, I mean, again, like collectively, I think throughout all of my life, I've been a very privileged person. Privileged in the sense that I never had to worry about money.
Yeah.
I didn't grow up in a blue collar household. My parents had their own business and, but it wasn't like they had their own business and I've always observed them to be like, everything is smooth sailing.
Yeah.
It's I've seen so much ups and downs. But again, it's because they've worked so hard that I pretty much like had everything I wanted and more, as a child. And it was so interesting because I went to this like very like, I guess I don't know if fancy is the word, but I went to this high school in my town that...
A prestigious high school.
I mean, it wasn't even prestigious, but it was just like a school in this area where there are a lot of wealthy people. And so...
Was this in California?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And then there were a lot of wealthy people and I have like friends, in high school that drove like Mercedes and Beamers and Lexus, and I drove a Camry, my first car was like a Toyota Camry and it was a great car, like that was like our first family car when we immigrated to the US. And like, when we learned how to drive, like my sister and I like share that car, but so it's not like in comparison to like my peers at the time, like we're pretty, like, it was pretty humble,
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, if I'm comparing it to somebody else.
Relative to other people,
then I actually have it so good, Yeah. So like, privilege is, like, really interesting to me, and I feel like I can go into so many different directions. But I think just in general, like, I feel like the fact that I'm an immigrant is a huge privilege.
Yeah.
And maybe you and I can talk a little bit about that because I think maybe that's something, I don't know if it's relatable, but maybe that's something that's like a little bit more approachable in terms of like how we talk about our background in this topic because, so I immigrated when I was 9 from Taiwan. So I'm Taiwanese American. And I remember, when I was like around 8, my parents like took me and my sister to California for the first time, and they took us to Disneyland, right? And then thinking back, there's this photo like at my parents' house that I love looking at every day because it just brings back so many memories. So it's actually this picture of me and my dad that was taken on the plane. So it was like a Polaroid picture.
Aww.
It was so cute. And I was tiny. And then it was like my parents taking us to America for the first time for a vacation to Disneyland. And we were like in business class.
Oh my gosh.
Which was like insane at the time.
Yeah.
Right? Now looking back, And then But then, like, I didn't know any better. I was just like, oh, I'm just, like, going to America with my parents, and then we're going to Disneyland, right?
Yeah.
But, like, without even thinking that, like, this is such a privilege,
Yeah.
to even, like, to travel outside of the country
Right.
and flying business class and then going to Disneyland,
Yeah.
right? And I just remember that trip, like, we had such a great time, obviously.
Yeah.
You're a
Yeah.
little kid going to Disneyland. And it was later, like, the following year, my parents, like, okay, we're going to immigrate to America, And I remember at the time, like, all of my relatives, like, in Taiwan were like, why would you do that? Because no one has ever done that, like, in our family. We were, like, my dad, my parents were the first people in our family to say, hey, like, we want our kids to grow up in a different country, to learn a different language.
Yeah.
So, they can have a greater advantage over other people, when they enter society, as an adult, which is like such foresight, like on my parents' part, right? Because they like defied like everyone in the family, when everyone was telling them no, they were like, no, we're doing this, right? And so like that. And looking back now, obviously at the time, like I didn't understand, we were just kind of going with what my parents like had envisioned for us. And so we went along with it. And at the time, like it was difficult for me initially because I did not speak a word of English.
Yeah.
And so like having to like learn English, like a second language from scratch when I was like 9. And like thankfully, like everyone in my elementary school that I went to were like so nice. Like they say kids are mean, which I know a lot of kids are mean, but like I never experienced like people bullying me because I didn't know how to speak English, and like that also is a privilege, to be so blessed in a position, like to be in a position where I am in an environment where these kids' parents are well educated enough to, like teach their kids to be nice to other kids,
Right.
And so I mean, I think just growing up as a child, I was definitely very privileged and to an extent very spoiled, because we were like so protected by my parents and we got everything we wanted. And, I was a baby, so like if you can just imagine what a brat I was, or can be, at any given time. But yeah, that's sort of like how I see privilege, like how I saw privilege, like growing up in like when I was a child and into my teens.
At which point did you come to this realization that you felt like you were privileged? Like, because growing up, when you're surrounded by all these things, these are just normal to you. Like as a kid, you're maybe not as conscious about that. When was it that you started to notice?
Damn, I mean, I maybe like not until I'm well into my 20s when I finally, I mean, I can't pinpoint exactly, to be honest with you, because I feel like I'm so grateful. I have a very strong mother. Like she is just so great. And, and again, once when we immigrated, my parents had to separate, not because like, they weren't happy together, but they had to separate and make the sacrifice of living in different countries because, our family business was still back in Asia, and the agreement is, if they brought us here, then my mom would have to stay here to take care of us, and while my dad takes care of the family business.
Right.
And so, so I feel like I've always been like a very sensitive like kid growing up, and I'm very observant, of like the dynamic and my parents and my mom, and I feel like because I always saw my mom like alone, like just taking care of business, that as a woman, as a daughter, like I think like I've always felt really grateful for her. And I can't say for sure like when it was like a full realization that was like, oh my gosh, like I was so privileged growing up. I think it wasn't until like I'm well into like adulthood that I fully recognize what that meant. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that you say that, because although Like, Anne and I share so many similarities. And one of the best things about being in the same studio is I've managed to find somebody who has like the same cultural background as me, where I could mention something and you'd be like, oh, I remember that in my childhood. I did the same thing, you know? But I feel like my experience was a little bit different in that, so I was born in Canada. My parents were the ones who immigrated. And so they left Vietnam. So that we're Chinese, but then they were born in Vietnam. And they had to leave because of the war. And they weren't flying business class. My mom actually was in a boat, right? They escaped in a boat, and they had to hide at the very bottom, you know, where everybody was very seasick, and they were being chased by pirates. Like, these are stories that, you know,
You
we
read
found-
about, but
yeah, you read
not
about, but
somebody
then, like,
you know.
yeah, my grandparents would tell us, and you know, that was crazy to hear that their relatives, like my mom's relatives, they were, you know, like raped on a boat coming here. And so they were, my mom was very lucky because the captain of her boat like didn't actually, like, he knew what was the consequences of what would happen if the pirates actually caught up to them. So he did everything he possibly could to like get the people to safety. So it was like it was a really tough journey for them. And then they had to, you know, they were on an island for a really long time, and then they moved eventually to Canada. And so life, I think, from their experiences really shaped how I was growing up. So the entire family's like, you know, very frugal. You know, I grew up with my parents working labor jobs. My dad, to this day, works 2 to 3 jobs. To this day, he is like one of the hardest working people that I know. And growing up, he worked night shift too. So I would only see my dad in the mornings when I woke up. He came back from work. I'd see him, he'd eat, I don't know, his breakfast or dinner, whatever you consider that meal is, and then he'd go to sleep. And then it wasn't until nighttime we would wake up, or he would wake up near dinner time, and then he would leave for work. And so he wouldn't really be at home. And my mom did the same thing. You know, she worked full time and then came home, took care of the family, and did all the house stuff. And so I feel like that was always, you know, the way that I was brought up. So we were very frugal in how we act even today, you know, and even how this whole sneaker thing came about was like, if I kind of bring it full circles, like the first time I even touched sneakers was because we couldn't find people that were making custom sneakers, and 2, they were too expensive. So it was always a thing for my cousins and I. We would make the things that we wanted because we couldn't afford it, or we didn't want our parents to spend that money.
Yep.
So we became very crafty. And I was like, oh, if you saw something on the shelves in the store, go home and hack it and figure out how to make it. And like, that's, I guess, what really gave birth to like my crafty side. And it's a little bit different now at 30, moving away from all of that, away from my family. And I have this strange opportunity to come to San Francisco, be in the States, in California, where, you know, I feel like we live in a little bit of a bubble.
We definitely live in a big old bubble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, you're surrounded by very intelligent people. The quality of life here is very good, but also, you know, San Francisco is a city that made me realize the disparity between people who actually have wealth and people who have nothing. Because although I came from a big city in Toronto, like, we didn't have the homeless situation that we have here. And it's just this strange like diaspora of like 2 completely different lifestyles. And like, I think that truly made me reflect on how privileged I am to be able to, at this point, pursue something that's so almost like romantic and rebellious, which is like, I want to be an artist. And I don't think with my upbringing that would have ever happened if I didn't come here. Because I always had that feeling of, I need to support myself so that my parents don't have to worry about me. They don't have to work extra. And like, you know, there was always that side that's like, you have to be self-sufficient. You have to make sure what you're doing is not a quote unquote waste of time. And I still struggle with that nowadays, like in terms of like my like relationship with my family. Yeah.
So, it's very clear, obviously, like our upbringing are very different, regardless of our cultural upbringing.
Yeah.
You know, earlier you asked me after I kind of shared a little bit about my upbringing, you know, was there a point in my life where I recognized that I was privileged? And so I would love to ask you the same question, right? Like, yes, like you didn't, you know, like your parents had to like, you know, flee their country and you, again, like you didn't grow up like flying business class,
Yeah.
you know, or, you know, having a car, you know,
Yeah.
that alone is a luxury, right? Was there at any point in time, even with all that, like, right, like from the outside looking in, it's like, you know, like you lived a very humble life.
Yeah.
But, you know, as a child within that family, did you ever feel like you like were privileged, or did you ever feel like you were like different from like your peers?
I think I was always like very much aware that like I have friends who, luckily I think in Toronto there's like a huge, we all just went to public school.
Yeah.
So you just had a wide range of people coming from many different backgrounds, socioeconomic status, and so on and so forth. Even though I would say in general it was like slightly lower, I didn't have anybody at my school who was like just crazy rich, you know, like, so, but still there were people who were struggling a little bit more. And that always made me feel like, okay, at the end of the day, I've got a roof over my head. You know, if I fail, I have a plan B. You know, my family's there to catch me if I fall, and what's the worst that could happen? So at least I knew there was always that. There would always be food, you know, on my plate.
Yeah.
And I think when I realized that, again, like you, much later in life, I think well into my adult years, I would say, and I didn't think much of that as a youngster.
Yeah.
Like you're just worried about all these other things like school, friends,
Yep.
your future. Yeah, so I didn't think about that.
Yeah. I want to share with you something that's like, was like so blatantly obvious that like I'm in such a privileged place, you know? So the last job that I was in, I was working for the studio in LA, and, you know, from where I was living, you know, at this like, you know, beautiful like studio apartment, it's not even like a 1-bedroom, but but it was still in this like beautiful apartment complex, with a gym, with a barbecue area, with the pool, with the jacuzzi, with all the nice amenities
Yeah.
that you can ever dreamed of.
Yeah.
And it was located in the arts district in LA, you know, which is this like beautiful area. And, you know, every day going to work for that studio, you know, I don't have to get on the freeway. You know, it takes me like 15 minutes, like on, you know, local streets.
Yeah.
And the studio itself, you know, isn't located in like a great area, you know, but they built out this like beautiful studio that's now gated, you know, so it's like protected. But I just remember, you know, again, like I grew up in San Francisco, you know, and I always knew, you know, yes, like San Francisco has like a homeless problem, and so is LA, but like it was even more like so in LA, I think, in my opinion, from what I've seen. And so I remember like every morning driving to work, you know, and it is so like, it's kind of sad, you know, now that I look at it. Like, I remember like the first few days I would try to find like, you know, I would like turn on my GPS and it's like, okay, take me to work. And the GPS will obviously like try to route me the fastest way to get to work. And then, you know, it's like I'm always driving by, you know, like homeless camps, you know, and all these tents on the streets. And then after like the second week, I was like, okay, I know how to get to the studio now. I'm going to turn off the GPS. I'm going to try a different route, you know? And then part of that, it was sort of like for my own selfish reasons, right? Because like it was like, I noticed it was hard for me. It was depressing for me, every morning going to work and seeing, like people living on the streets.
Yeah.
So I was like physically consciously trying to find a different route to maybe I would see less of it. Mm-hmm. And no matter what street I took to get to work.
You would always see it.
Yes.
It's the same thing.
Right, same thing, right? And then once I get to work, though, there's this beautiful studio that they built for celebrity clients.
Yeah.
And it is so beautiful inside. You have
Yeah.
all these amazing products that cost thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And then every person has a MacBook Pro, and it's it's luxurious inside.
Yeah.
Okay. But it's just again, to your point, it's there is just such a big disparity between what's on the inside and what's happening outside that it became really difficult for me, going to work every day and it's really strange because I think it's only, I don't think I was always this way. I think it's only when I've gotten older and have seen more that I started to take this kind of stuff more personally. Mm-hmm. And it was really hard for me to separate, what was happening.
Yeah.
Right? And it to a point where I was just so depressed, going to work every day because I just felt what am I doing?
Yeah.
Does this align with my values? At the end of the day, I remember in my last job before that one, I worked for a big corporate company. And then, anytime me and my peers on my team, we would get really stressed because of a particular deadline, we would always just okay, let's check ourselves.
Take a step back.
At the end of the day, it's just shoes. Mm-hmm. It's just effing shoes.
Yeah.
It's not life or death. Mm-hmm. Okay. So stop stressing. It's gonna be fine, And so, yeah, I mean that's such a clear example to me of what privilege means.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such an interesting visual, I feel that you've put into my head. And that's totally what I experienced too moving here that I didn't experience back home. Because I was surrounded by, people just working to live.
Yeah.
And being here, I remember the first year I was here, I met some friends in the area and we went to their apartment, which was a flat. And it was brick on the inside, absolutely gorgeous. They had a balcony. And of course, we got there during the day. It was on Minna Street in San Francisco. So if you know San Francisco, you know Minna Street. And I had no idea. I'm a little oblivious when it comes to my what's in the city. It takes me a while to get to know it. And so we go into their loft essentially, and it's brick on the inside, absolutely gorgeous. They got a balcony looking over, and everybody's holding a glass of wine. Mm-hmm. And downstairs are people injecting themselves. Mm-hmm. And when we leave that day, and it's just we're one level above, and it's so completely different, the life outside and inside. And then you have all these, of course, they're all the friends are people in tech, and they're talking about where they live, how much they make, what kind of food they're eating, Michelin star restaurants, and that's at the point where I understood this is so different. Mm-hmm. And when you start to live in the city and you see this all the time, I think people get really accustomed. They don't see it anymore.
Yeah.
They force themselves to not see, say, a homeless person asking for money on the side of the street. You just walk by. You just, block that out of your consciousness, and you walk by. And I feel that's one of the points when I realized wow, although we don't have anything, we're still getting settled here. We're working towards a lifestyle that some people would never be able to even experience, even if they wanted to.
Yeah.
We're already in a different category, or there are things that are going for us that other people do not have. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy when you say, we're here obsessing over shoes and how
Totally.
fancy and luxurious and how expensive they can be and how much money we can make, you know, making a piece of art that you wear on your feet when people outside literally don't have shoes. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's definitely good to think about and good to feel grounded every single day when you go into work.
100%.
Yeah.
Damn, Vicky, sorry, that was like really heavy.
Yeah.
But,
no, this is a heavy subject. And
yeah.
And I think like sometimes I forget when you are settling in somewhere and every single day starts blending together because you're so obsessive over, like, you're so hard, your head's down working, you kind of forget to, like you said, take a step back and look around you and see what's happening. And sometimes, like, on weekends, in the Bay Area, actually, there are a lot of, like, really nice bakeries, right? Mm-hmm. And I would call up my parents and I would be like, oh yeah, so we went, you know, to test all these bakeries out to see which one had the best croissant, for example. And I would be like, oh yeah, like a croissant is like $5. And my parents are like, $5 for a croissant? Like, they went to the supermarket one time and the two of them were just pacing back and forth because there was a dessert there that they really wanted to try, but it was like $4 or $5, and they couldn't even get themselves to do it. You know?
Yeah.
And it's like, so, like, our way of life and our way of living is completely, I've noticed that it's like completely different from what my parents had to go through, where they work to live and we work to keep ourselves happy.
Or they work to live versus like you work to like enjoy the nicer things in life that
Like,
makes you happy.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
I've gotten to this point where I feel entitled to the fact that I can chase my happiness and not have to worry about survival.
I mean, that's a really good way to round out this
Right.
episode. I mean, that is privilege at its core,
It's crazy.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty bananas, you know, if we're just kind of comparing like where our parents are today, right? So my parents, like, they recently retired and they're living their best life, to be honest with you, and as they should, like they so deserve it.
But they earned it too.
They effing earned it, you know? And like I always encourage them, I'm like, spend every penny you have while you're alive, you know? But then, you know, their Asian parents are always like, no, like, you know, we're
gonna save
want
it
to
for
leave,
you.
leave it for you and your sister. I'm like, no, please spend every penny,
Yeah.
you know? Like, I don't need your money, you know? And it's nice, like, you know, I'm so happy for them that they're in a position where, like, they can travel wherever they want, eat whatever they want, and not have to think about, like, oh, crap, like, is this eating into my retirement fund?
Yeah.
You know, because they're just, like, again, they're taken care of, you know, and, like, but it doesn't come from me. They're taking care of themselves,
Yeah.
you know? I think, like, you know, as the Asian child, you know, like, there's this, like, tradition way of thinking of, like, you know, when we grow up, we have to take care of our parents, you know?
Absolutely.
But my parents has always, like, again, like, they're just so before their time, I think, you know, again, like, they didn't grow up, you know, in the States, in America, they weren't educated, like, you know, in a foreign country, but, like, they've always told us in the beginning, you know, from when we were young, it's like, we're going to take care of ourselves. Like, you guys don't ever have to worry about us, you know? And they're true to their words, you know, even though, like, we do have that desire to want to take care of them, but it's like, there's nothing more that I can do for you that you can't do for yourself.
Yeah.
Like, they're that amazing,
Yeah.
you know? So,
Which is great.
Yeah.
It's a good feeling to have, but also, like, I'm glad that you're still going to go and see them soon. You know, that's got to be a thing.
gosh,
Like,
I know.
Yes, you know, they've given us, they're so self-sufficient that even as they're aging, we're lucky in that we don't have to worry about them yet, right? Because they're still taking care of each other, taking care of themselves, and they allow us this time to just do what we do. And then, you know, whenever the daughters, like, have time, give us a call. We just want to hear your voice a little bit. We just want to know how you're doing.
Yeah.
And that's, like, Yeah, that's super sweet. But call your moms.
I
and
know,
your
I
dads.
was gonna say, like, can we just all go call our parents after this? Like,
Yeah.
don't make me cry now.
Yeah.
Okay. But, okay, well, that's all the time that we have today. But thank you so much for
Yeah.
listening to our story and checking in with us on YouTube and on Spotify.
Yeah.
We really appreciate you being here.
Yeah. Thank you so much. See you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Wait, when did you drink your coffee?
Up until like 3:30.
Girl! What are you doing?
Microdosing.
Do we still do we need?
Coffee.
Okay.
I'm not prepared for this, so.
Yes, we are.